You made clear in your presentation that capitalism was a new thing that came into existence sometime around toward the end of the 18th century, and then it wasn't either property, which had always existed, or markets, which had always existed in one form or the other. And you've written quite a bit at times about the kind of society that capitalism brought into being. For example, you wrote in this period of democratic capitalism that this new society was, quote, revolutionary precisely because it rejected the moral pretenses of ancient traditional orders, unquote. And I could multiply many quotes from things you've said and things that other people whose works you've included in your books, in edited books, have said along the same lines. You seem to be saying that, in fact, at one place you say at the heart of a pluralistic society, which you've championed, it's empty. It's empty so that each person can seek his own vision of the transcendence. Well, given the way American society is falling apart in the sense of there being no common moral vision, how would you relate the need for a common moral vision on all areas of morality with the actions of capitalistic society, which renders the communitarian, which nullifies rather the communitarian ideal by making each person responsible for coming up with his own vision of truth? How is that different, for example, from that infamous statement that the Supreme Court made when it says that each person has a right to create his own reality?
Well, in arguing that capitalism revolutionized old moralities and traditional societies, I have in mind the discovery of wealth, the creation of wealth, which changed the way of thinking about poverty. Before capitalism, it was no disgrace to have poor people. Everybody had them. Every country had them. Nowadays, no leader of the 172 nations at the UN can come before the UN and say, my country has lots of poor people, and we intend to keep them that way. You can't do that. It's a disgrace if you have lots of poor people, because there are ways, as shown by other countries of the world, to move out of poverty, even very quickly. I remember photographs of my uncle, who was just after World War II. His ship went to Korea, and he photographs of Seoul, which is like a cow town. Mud, cows, and today it's just unbelievable. And it proved to Peter Berger, for example, that it's possible to move out of poverty in as few as 2 generations, a whole nation. It's also proof that the poor don't always get poorer, and the rich don't always get richer. And it also proves in another way that the United States is not made poorer by the growth of other nations. The growth of Japan and Korea did not make us more poor. Capitalism is not a zero-sum game. It's possible for all of us to grow wealthy. Do different things, but grow wealthy. That's one point I want to make. Second, I disagree with you that capitalism destroys the communitarian order. I think there are no people on earth who live more communitarian lives than the people of the United States. But we don't live them in fixed traditional communities. We live them in our associations. The association gathered around the Chesterton Review and around the Distributism and meetings like this. I had a friend in Italy. I said, why did you move to America, to Cleveland, which is what he said. He said, fare fortuna, make money. And I said, well, why did you come back to the to Italy? He says, per vivere, to live. He said, in America, you work 8 hours a day, and then you go to 8 hours of meetings in the evenings and weekends. And he said, here you have a shave and a haircut can last an hour. You have dinner last 3 hours. You live a little, you know. And anyway, but one reason we're so busy is nobody told me in college that marriage, that you're essentially driving your children around. Marriage is essentially a transportation service. I was totally unprepared for that. Every day. So I think we're a very communitarian society, but we're not organized by the state. We have lots of reasons for fearing and worrying about the state and its increase of powers. I think you do put your finger on the greatest weakness of our kind of society. The attempt to make a plural society which is open to everybody and people of all kinds of beliefs does make an enormous difficulty for us to achieve a common moral vision. It was a lot easier when we were all Christians, or virtually all Christians. It's got increasingly difficult as we have people from very other religious traditions or no religious traditions at all. So we have a problem. I say the weakest part of our system is what I call moral ecology, the moral environment in which we have to swim. And we're having a very hard time establishing that in a common way. And I must say, even in politics, we don't have the kind of union in politics that we used to have. It's really fractured, and I find it often really scary, the attempt to destroy one another in the other party. Watch the systematic attempt now on the part of Republicans to undercut President Obama, just as the Democrats undercut President Bush, day after day after day. And look at the way in which right now Democrats are trying to destroy Eric Cantor, Paul Ryan, and any other possible rival in 212. The politics of destruction is very, very real. And that didn't used to happen. Also, religious people used to be split between the parties. Now, of all those people who go to church at least once a week, more than 2/3 support the Republican Party. Of all those people who never go to church, or less frequently than once a month, over 2/3 support the Democratic Party. That didn't used to happen. I find that scary. I wish it hadn't happened. But anyway, I do think you're right about the moral problem at the heart of our society.
And I have one more question.
Oh, yeah.
If you still time. You've praised India because of its rising GDP and so on. You talked about the experience of immigrants prospering in this country. I have an article in front of me about the tremendous wave of suicides in India and among Indian farmers, almost 200,000 between 1997 and 2007, precisely because of the neoliberal economy that is destroying the traditional way of life. Now, it seems to me that, and I'd like you to comment on this, that you've been willing to take credit for any achievements or apparent achievements of capitalism, but not willing to say that capitalism bears any of the blame for any of the downside, and that you have even taken institutions that some people see, at least, as antithetical to capitalism, for example, unions, and taken credit for the achievements that they have made when they've basically been acting against the competitive principle and trying to preserve some kind of community life, some kind of a solidarity.
My view of capitalism is best stated. My good friend Irving Kristol, who taught me so much, wrote a book called 2 Cheers for Capitalism. Not 3, just 2. And I have written, I think 1 is quite enough. You know, I think it's a very poor system for a lot of reasons. For example, one of the fundamental dynamisms of capitalism is invention. When somebody invented the automatic dryer, the hot air dryer, Bendix dryers went out of business. Bendix was the main industry in Syracuse, where I taught for a while. And then you have all these 50-year-old people with kids just going to college who lose their jobs, lose their health care, can't keep their kids in college. I think that's a terrible system. It's just better than the others. It's better than the alternatives. And on your last point about unions, it's not that I'm giving capitalism credit. I'm saying that unions are a proper part of a capitalist system. It's a question of who's right or who's wrong in particular instances. But as a general principle, you need both.